Before we begin, remember to like, subscribe, and comment below to share your own stories of strength and new beginnings. The seating chart was a masterpiece of social engineering, a testament to Cassidy Monroe's life's work. In the quiet hum of her apartment, with less than 24 hours until her wedding, she stood back, admiring the 200 names meticulously arranged on a large foam board. Each name was a tiny gear in the intricate clockwork of the event, and she, the master clockmaker, had ensured every single one would turn without friction. Her liberal Aunt Carol was seated a safe 3 tables away from Uncle Robert, whose political commentary could curdle milk. Her vivacious, single work friends were positioned strategically near Nathan's handsome, unattached cousins, a subtle act of matchmaking she couldn't resist. This was her calling, anticipating needs, preempting conflict, and constructing a flawless scaffolding for other people's happiness. She was the planner, the fixer, the silent, tireless architect of joy. The irony of her situation was a physical weight, a constant pressure behind her sternum. The most significant, complex, and emotionally charged event of her entire career was her own wedding, yet she felt like an unwanted consultant rather than the guest of honor. A profound exhaustion had seeped into her marrow, a soul-deep weariness that 8 hours of sleep couldn't touch. It wasn't just the logistical labyrinth of vendors and RSVPs. It was Nathan. He had become a stranger in their shared home. His affection, once a warm, enveloping blanket, was now a threadbare cloth, offering no comfort. His compliments were hollow echoes of things he once meant, recited with the flat affect of a bored actor. His touch was a fleeting, perfunctory gesture, a box checked on a list of spousal duties. When she'd tried, gently, to breach the growing chasm between them, he'd turned her vulnerability into a weapon against her. "Don't you think I have enough on my plate right now, Cass?" He would sigh, his tone soft but the words a clear dismissal. "The wedding is stressing us both out. Let's just get through it." And she, conditioned by a lifetime of placating, would retreat, berating herself for being needy, for adding to his burdens. And then there was Amber. Her younger sister, the family's designated sunbeam, had always orbited Cassidy, reflecting her choices. But lately, that reflection had grown distorted, warped by a smug, proprietary air that made Cassidy's skin crawl. For years, Amber's imitation had been framed as admiration. The same hairstyle a month after Cassidy got hers, a sudden passion for vintage photography, an abrupt love for the obscure folk music Cassidy cherished. Cassidy had always told herself it was sweet. Now it felt sinister, like a cuckoo laying its egg in her nest. Amber would recline on their mother's floral sofa during planning sessions, a picture of languid grace, offering suggestions that were perfectly pitched to sound helpful while subtly undermining Cassidy's vision. She had cultivated a private world of inside jokes with Nathan, their shared glances and sudden bursts of laughter creating an invisible fence around them, leaving Cassidy on the outside of her own life. Her mother, Elizabeth, remained blissfully, willfully oblivious. To her, this wedding was the culmination of all her hopes for her eldest daughter, a closing of a deal before the product expired. "I'm just so relieved you finally locked someone down, honey," she'd said just last week, patting Cassidy's hand with a condescending sympathy. "A woman hits 30, and the good ones just evaporate. Now we just have to get our Amber married off. But she won't have any trouble. She was always the pretty one." The words were delivered with the same breezy thoughtlessness she used to comment on the weather, a casual reinforcement of the narrative that had defined their lives. Cassidy was the smart, capable, responsible one. Amber was the pretty, charming, effortless one. For Cassidy, love and approval were conditional, things to be earned through perpetual service and self-effacement. For Amber, they were her birthright. The evidence of a deeper rot had been accumulating for weeks, like sharp pieces of glass in a well-trodden path. It started with the locket. It was a small, silver oval, a gift from her father just before he died. It wasn't valuable, but it was priceless. It had vanished from her jewelry box 2 months ago. She searched everywhere, a growing knot of dread in her stomach. Then, last Tuesday, during a final dress fitting, she saw it. It was nestled in the hollow of Amber's throat, gleaming against her sister's tanned skin. "Oh, this old thing," Amber had chirped when she caught Cassidy staring, her voice a little too bright. "Nathan found it for me. We were browsing a little vintage market, and he said it reminded him of me. Isn't he the sweetest? He knows how much I've always admired your classic style. The lie was so audacious, so breathtakingly bold that it silenced Cassidy completely. It was her locket. She knew the unique, tiny scratch near the clasp from the time she dropped it on a cobblestone street in college. But to say so would be to detonate a bomb. She would be the hysterical, jealous bride, paranoid and cruel to her loving sister. So she swallowed the truth, the bitter taste coating her tongue, and said nothing. Then there were the digital ghosts. Nathan had become obsessively private with his phone, but one evening he left it on the kitchen counter while he took a long shower. The screen lit up with a notification from Amber. Can't stop thinking about last night. It was followed by a string of kiss face emojis. Her hands had trembled as she picked up the phone, her heart hammering against her ribs. When Nathan emerged, wrapped in a towel, she confronted him, her voice barely a whisper. He'd actually laughed, a low, dismissive chuckle. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her against his damp body, a practiced gesture of placation. She's just excited to have me as a brother-in-law, that's all, he'd murmured into her hair. You know how dramatic she is. We were all watching that thriller movie, remember? She's talking about the plot twist. He was so convincing, so reassuringly normal that she allowed herself to believe him. She wanted to believe him. The alternative was too monstrous to contemplate. Don't be paranoid, she chanted to herself that night, staring at the dark ceiling. It's your wedding week. You're just stressed. The final, unassailable proof arrived disguised as a favor. 2 weeks ago, Nathan had approached her with a sheepish smile. Cass, my cloud storage is completely maxed out, and I have all these work files I can't lose. You're so much better at all this tech stuff. Could you back everything up to your account? I'd be eternally grateful. It was a perfect appeal to her nature, a request that played on her competence and her innate desire to be useful. So late one night, surrounded by seating charts and vendor contracts, she'd logged into his accounts and started the transfer. As the progress bar crept across the screen, a folder labeled Misc Legal caught her eye. Curiosity, sharp and painful, compelled her to click. Inside was a single file. An NDA, a non-disclosure agreement. It wasn't the standard prenup she'd seen clients use to protect assets. This was different. This was about silence. Buried in pages of dense legalese was a clause that would prohibit her, in the event of a separation, from discussing any aspect of their relationship with anyone. The penalty for breach was a sum of money that would leave her financially ruined. He had floated the idea months ago, calling it a simple privacy measure, a modern formality. She had been deeply hurt and had refused. To see it here, saved and waiting, felt like discovering a loaded gun in a drawer of love letters. A cold dread washed over her. Driven by a grim, sickening certainty, she navigated to his photo and message backups. He'd hidden the folders, but he'd underestimated her. She was a planner. She knew how to find things. And there it was, her entire life a lie. Screenshots of bank statements showed methodical transfers of money from the joint savings account, money she had deposited from her own earnings for the wedding, into Nathan's private account. Nearly $20,000, siphoned off in neat, untraceable increments. Then the texts. Not just a few flirtatious messages, but an entire 6-month-long affair documented in glowing blue and gray bubbles. A secret epic of betrayal. A text from Nathan to Amber. She's so gullible. She actually believes I'm stressed about the wedding. Her constant need for reassurance is exhausting. Amber's reply, just a few more weeks until I'm all yours, legally and otherwise. Try not to look too bored when she starts talking about the goddamn flower arrangements. And the one that shattered what was left of Cassidy's heart. She makes it so easy to lie to her. She wants to be a martyr. I'm just giving her the cross to carry. Cassidy sat motionless in the blue glow of the monitor, the world around her dissolving. The pain was not a sharp stab, but a slow, crushing compression, squeezing the air from her lungs, the life from her spirit. It was the collective weight of every sacrifice, every swallowed opinion, every time she had dimmed her own light to let others shine. The tears she expected did not come. The grief was so immense, so absolute, that it burned itself out in an instant, leaving behind something hard, clear, and cold as diamond. It left behind a plan. She was an event planner, after all, and this betrayal would not end with her as the weeping victim. It would end with a perfectly executed, flawlessly timed event of her own design. For the next 2 weeks, she played the part of the happy, loving bride with an Oscar-worthy performance. She smiled at Nathan's hollow kisses, listened with feigned patience to her mother's backhanded compliments, and even told Amber how lovely the locket looked on her. She was the star of a tragedy, and she would not miss a single cue before bringing the house down. The reception hall was a dreamscape of her own creation. Thousands of tiny fairy lights were strung through the high, exposed wooden beams, casting a magical, warm glow over the 200 guests. Tables were adorned with clouds of white roses and fragrant silver-dollar eucalyptus. The air itself seemed to vibrate with joy, a symphony of laughter, clinking glasses, and romantic music. Cassidy stood beside Nathan at the head table, a vision in ivory lace, the heavy satin of her dress pooling at her feet. The ceremony had been an out-of-body experience. She walked the aisle on a cloud of cold resolve, her smile a mask of steel. She had recited the vows she'd written months ago, the loving words tasting like poison and power on her tongue. As she said "I do," her eyes had met her grandmother, S, in the front row, and she'd seen a flicker of understanding, a quiet acknowledgement of the storm to come. She had smiled through the photos, the muscles in her face aching. Now, as the champagne was poured and the toasts began, she allowed herself one single, genuine breath of relief. The performance was almost over. Her mother delivered a rambling, tearful speech about her two beautiful daughters and the handsome, wonderful man who was now her son. The best man told a few cringeworthy jokes. And then Amber rose. She held her champagne flute with a delicate, predatory grace, a sly, triumphant smile gracing her perfect lips. The room fell silent, captivated by her beauty. "I'd like to propose a toast," Amber began, her voice as smooth and sweet as honey. "To my big sister, Cassidy." She paused, her eyes scanning Cassidy from head to toe, a look of pitying tenderness that was pure performance. Cassidy has always been the one who gets there first. First to get her driver's license, first to graduate, first to build a real career. Another pause, this one waited, sharp. "She's always the one to set the path, and I'm usually just trying to keep up. But tonight I want to thank her for getting there first, even when the man was never truly meant for her." A confused, uncomfortable murmur rippled through the guests. Beside her, Cassidy felt Nathan go rigid, his hand slipping from the small of her back. Her mother's proud smile wavered. Amber's sweet expression curdled, replaced by a mask of undisguised malice. She raised her glass higher, her eyes locking onto Cassidy's. "So here's to forgiveness, which I know my big sister is so good at. Here's to sisterhood in all its complicated, messy glory. And here's to life." She deliberately placed her free hand on her flat stomach, her gaze a poisoned dart. "Because I'm pregnant, and Nathan's the father." The silence that crashed down on the room was absolute. It was a physical force, a heavy, sound-dampening blanket that smothered every breath. A guest dropped a fork, and the clatter against the china was as loud and jarring as a gunshot. Her mother let out a strangled, horrified gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. 200 pairs of eyes darted from Amber's smug, expectant face to Nathan's, which was a deathly pale mask of pure, cornered panic, and finally to Cassidy. This was the moment. The climax Amber had planned. They were all waiting for the bride to crumble, for the screams, the tears, the satisfying drama of a woman broken. But Cassidy did not scream. She did not cry. A preternatural calm had settled over her, the cool, quiet confidence of a general watching her enemy walk directly into an ambush. She turned to Nathan. Her expression was placid, almost gentle. She reached up and with a slow, deliberate motion, straightened his bow tie. Then she turned her gaze back to her sister. With a grace that was both horrifying and magnificent to the onlookers, she walked around the head table and up to the small stage where the DJ stood, his jaw slack. She took the microphone from its stand. The metal was cool and solid, an anchor in the swirling chaos. She took one deep, cleansing breath. She looked directly at Amber, whose triumphant smile was beginning to twitch at the corners. Cassidy's voice, when she spoke, was not loud, but it was perfectly clear and carried to every corner of the dead-silent hall. "Thank you, Amber," she said, her tone even, almost conversational. "You have no idea. You just saved me from a lifetime of lies and a very expensive divorce." Amber's face fell, confusion warring with her fading smugness. This was not in her script. Cassidy turned her serene gaze to the sea of stunned faces. "My sincerest apologies, everyone. It seems we have a slight, unscheduled change in the evening's program. But since you're all here, and since we are on the very interesting topic of secrets, I'd like to share a few of my own." She nodded to the DJ, who, jolted from his stupor, fumbled with his laptop. The large projector screen behind her, which had been displaying a tasteful C and N monogram, flickered to life. I had a little slideshow prepared, Cassidy explained, her voice as smooth as silk. A nostalgic look back. I hope you don't mind. I took the liberty of making a few last-minute additions this morning. The first slides were disarmingly normal. A chubby-cheeked Cassidy in a sandbox. An awkward teenage Cassidy with a mouth full of braces. A proud graduation photo. A tentative wave of relieved laughter passed through the room, a brief release of the unbearable tension. Then, Cassidy clicked the small remote in her hand. The screen changed abruptly. Soft focus photos vanished, replaced by the stark, black-and-white grid of a bank statement. A bright red arrow pointed to a series of outgoing transfers. From CASSIDYM to an ATHANC personal. The dates span the last 8 months. The grand total was circled at the bottom, $19,750. A note in clear text appeared beside it. My contribution to our future home down payment. A collective, audible gasp swept the hall. Click, the screen showed a text conversation. Amber's smiling profile picture was next to her words. He's such a fool. He thinks your morning sickness is just sympathy pains for my supposed stomach bug. Men are so easy to fool. Nathan's reply underneath, just keep playing the supportive sister. Once the ring is on her finger and we're married, we've won. He'll look like the villain if he leaves me for you after the wedding. Click. Another text thread, this one from Nathan to Amber. God, another 3-hour conversation about her feelings. It's like she needs constant validation just to breathe. Sometimes I wish she were more like you. You just get it. You don't need anything. Click. The final slide. A high-resolution image of the non-disclosure agreement. Cassidy had highlighted the most vicious clause in bright yellow, the one that outlined the $250,000 penalty for speaking out. Cassidy lowered the remote. She gave the shell-shocked crowd a small, sad smile, her eyes finding her mother's, whose face was a crumbling ruin of disbelief and dawning public humiliation. I've always been the planner, Cassidy said, her voice catching for just 1 second, the only crack in her flawless composure. I plan for contingencies. And this, dear family, was the only way any of you would ever finally believe me. She placed the microphone carefully back in its stand, the soft thud echoing in the vast silence. She descended the steps, her movements unhurried. She walked directly to her grandmother, whose wrinkled face was set with a look of fierce pride. Without a word, Cassidy handed her the heavy, fragrant bridal bouquet. Her grandmother's hand closed over hers, a silent, powerful squeeze of unwavering solidarity. Then, Cassidy Monroe turned her back on the wreckage. She walked through the stunned, frozen tableau of her former life, her head held high, the train of her ivory dress whispering behind her like a sigh of relief. She did not glance at Amber's ashen, contorted face or Nathan's vacant, terrified eyes. She walked straight to the grand double doors of the hall, pushed them open, and stepped out into the cool, cleansing night air. She left the explosion of whispers, tears, and accusations to detonate behind her. Ahead, there was only the quiet street and the vast, liberating darkness. The wedding wasn't just canceled, it was annihilated. A cousin with a long-held suspicion of Amber's character had filmed Cassidy's entire speech. By the next morning, the video, now titled The Calmest Bride Burn of All Time, was a viral supernova. Cassidy knew nothing of this. She had checked into a sleek downtown hotel, a place she'd bookmarked years ago but never felt she could justify the expense. She used a credit card she'd opened secretly months prior, an emergency fund for a future she was now living. She ordered a bottle of the most expensive champagne on the room service menu, stripped off the 100-pound dress, and sat in a plush robe by the window, watching the city lights glitter like scattered diamonds. Her phone was off. The storm of missed calls and frantic texts could rage without her. For the first time in her adult life, her own peace was the top priority. Amber and Nathan attempted a pathetic damage control tour. They gave a tearful interview to a local tabloid news station, portraying Cassidy as an unstable, vindictive woman scorned. They claimed the screenshots were doctored, a cruel, elaborate fiction born of jealousy. But the evidence was too specific, the digital trail too clear. The internet, in its collective wisdom, became a jury. Sleuths cross-referenced dates, analyzed the metadata of the viral video, and ripped their story to shreds in comment sections and forums. Her mother called 2 days later. Cassidy, feeling fortified by solitude and champagne, finally answered. Cassidy, what have you done? Elizabeth's voice was thin and strained, not with concern, but with the acidic shame of public exposure. You have humiliated this family. This was a private matter. It stopped being a private matter when Nathan started embezzling my life savings. Mom, Cassidy replied, her voice calm and cool, stripped of its old, dutiful warmth. It stopped being private when my own sister started sleeping with my fiancé and got pregnant with his child. Where was your concern for my dignity then? I'm trying to stay neutral, Cassidy. Amber is my daughter, too, and she's pregnant. She's vulnerable. She needs me. The words were the final, clean snip of a cord that had been fraying for decades. Neutrality in the face of injustice is a choice, Cassidy said, her voice quiet but firm. It's choosing the side of the oppressor. You made your choice a long time ago. You just never had to say it out loud before. Goodbye, Mom. She ended the call not with a feeling of loss, but with the clean, sharp relief of a necessary amputation. The gangrenous limbs of her family were finally severed. The online support that swelled around her was a tidal wave of affirmation. Her new, anonymous email inbox was flooded with thousands of messages from women and men across the globe. They shared their own stories of quiet betrayals, of being gaslit, of being the responsible one, whose foundations were eroded by the very people they supported. They didn't call her a victim. They called her a hero, an icon, a queen. They saw a woman who had calmly, methodically, and brilliantly reclaimed her own narrative. They saw a planner. This global chorus of shared experience became her lifeline. She realized her pain, which had felt so isolating, was in fact a universal language. She had spent a decade trying to earn love from three people constitutionally incapable of giving it freely. Now, she was being showered with it by thousands of strangers who saw her strength, not her utility. She moved. She packed 2 suitcases, sold the rest, and bought a one-way ticket to a city on the coast she'd only ever seen in movies. With the money she easily recovered from Nathan in a swift, uncontested legal settlement, his public disgrace left him no room to fight, and a surprising windfall from a Buy the Bride a New Beginning GoFundMe page, she started her own business. She called it the Phoenix Planning Co. Her story, her viral fame, became her greatest asset. Clients sought her out not in spite of her past, but because of it. They wanted the woman who could orchestrate such a perfect takedown to orchestrate their perfect day. They trusted her implicitly, knowing she understood, on a cellular level, the profound importance of a celebration built on truth and surrounded by people who truly protected your heart. Her business didn't just succeed, it soared. A year to the day after she walked out of her own reception, she launched a podcast. She called it Left at the Aisle, but it wasn't about bitterness or revenge. It was about rebuilding. With her calm, measured voice, she discussed recognizing the subtle red flags of manipulation, the insidious nature of gaslighting, and the quiet, revolutionary courage it takes to choose yourself. She interviewed therapists, financial advisors, and other women who had transformed their deepest betrayals into their greatest triumphs. She was building a new community, a new kind of family, bound not by blood, but by the resilient strength of a protected heart. One evening, she sat in her chic, minimalist office overlooking the glittering, endless city. An email notification chimed. It was from a woman in rural Ohio. "I just wanted to thank you," the email began. "I've been in a relationship that has been slowly dimming my light for 10 years. I always thought it was my fault, that I was too sensitive, too demanding. I listened to your first episode today. I heard your story. And for the first time, I didn't feel crazy. I felt seen. I'm leaving him tomorrow. I've booked a hotel. Thank you for showing me how to light my own match." Cassidy leaned back in her chair, a slow, genuine smile spreading across her face, a smile that reached her eyes and warmed her from the inside out. The scars were still there, faint silver lines on her soul, but they no longer ached. They were the intricate, beautiful lines on a map, the map that had guided her out of a desolate wilderness and into this vast, brilliant, open life. Her power hadn't come from retaliation. It had come from revelation. Her revenge wasn't the ruin of their lives. They had authored that themselves. Her revenge was the simple, profound, and undeniable fact of her own thriving happiness. She had planned her own rescue, and it was, without question, the most successful event of her life. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and comment below. Your voice matters.